Ambassador, the 1.5 degree target, is it realistic?
The target is realistic. Whether we can get it as a quote-unquote black and white position is, in any negotiation, is going to be challenging. What we are going to have to work for is to get language that will not compromise 1.5, but language that will allow some room for those who have scientific questions against 1.5, and that's where we are at this very moment, is trying to find the language that will not compromise our targeted position, because it's really important to us, but yet find a position that others who are involved can live with, because in this it's about consensus. One person, one country, one team can block you. We don't want that. We want to be able to work not with a position that is seen as a soft position that doesn't make sense to the Caribbean and small island nations, but a position that will not compromise our position, but one that will allow us to move forward and set targets. So we're looking at some trigger points, and that is what you have to do in negotiations, and that's where we are.
If it gets to the point where the Caribbean negotiators would have to compromise, what would be an acceptable compromise position for us?
Well, I think there's some compromise language you might use that would sort of ensure that we state 1.5 or emissions below, well below 2. It's a language around that. We're not going to give up. There are three things that are very critical to us: loss and damages, the 1.5 issue, and the whole access to finance issue. And we can't give up on any of those, but we can negotiate around them.
Could you speak to us about the importance of the climate change issue for Antigua, especially as it relates to drought and the water issue?
As I have been saying in the meetings here, this whole discussion on climate change is probably the most important discussion that in any United Nations dialogue as it relates to the existence of island nations like Antigua and small islands. This, for us more than anybody, this getting agreement and leaving here with some real, concrete, practical, implementable agreement is critical to us most. In Antigua, everything hangs on this. We know the drought we have been having for 27 months plus. We know the cost of water, and we know that because of the drought, water prices increase because we have to have more reverse osmosis. It means that we have to increase water. We know that you have to use water in our tourist industry. If we expand our tourist industry, more hotels and so on, we're going to be needing more water. More water meaning more desalination meaning more expenses. So for us, this is not an academic discussion. This is a real discussion. This people's life and livelihood hangs on this whole climate discussion. Antiguans and people from in the Caribbean have to wake up to this, not just at this level at the UN and the level with the Department of Environment, but at the level of the man on the street. We have to understand that our drought is as a result of emissions, as a result of the climatic conditions, and we have to do what we can in our own country to make sure that we can, from the man on the street, beat it back, and from government policy, make the right conditions be available so we can address the questions. Potworks Dam being dry is not as a result simply because we're just not getting rain. We're not getting rain because of the climatic conditions that we are driving the world, and Antigua has been driven. It's not our fault, but we are part of the world and we are part of it.
The issue of financing, could you just elaborate on that? Is Antigua in a position to adapt and to mitigate against climate change as it relates to the finances that would be needed to do this?
The discussion here on financing is very important because and this discussion expands beyond this meeting, because Antigua, which is defined like most Caribbean islands as middle income, find ourselves in a situation where we are locked out of grants and aids, and we are locked out of funding from some of the international institutions, and therefore we don't have the finance to fight the climate change. So we have to turn to the institutions that allow for financing, like the GCF and others. And so for the discussion here on finance, we have to make sure that our position of access to finance, and that can be developing a number of mechanisms with trading within the whole global remissions and the whole trade for that is being discussed right at this time. We have to make sure that we can find a space that will allow islands like Antigua access to finance, and not just because we are small and vulnerable, but because of our special circumstances. We don't have the money in our country. That has to come from the support that the financing agencies will give us as a result of the conditions forced on us through climatic changes.
Are you holding out much hope for these negotiations?
Yes, I have to be hopeful, and it has been tough. It is very, very difficult. But as I said, there are three things that we have to hold to, and if we can get all or most of these things: one, the conditions relating to loss and damage, how we get compensated and assisted; two, the 1.5 or as close to that as we can get; and three, access. Access is the word for financing, not whether you get paid or not. That is not important, it's how you get the payment. Access to financing. And I have to say, we are putting some things in place right now in our country that if some of the conditions on financing come through here, we will find ourselves in a little better position.